Hey everybody, I am Keaton. This is Kid Catholic Season 6, Episode 11, and I am here with Father Brian O'Brien here in St. Francis Xavier Church in Stillwater to talk about the recent California law that has passed the Senate. So I sort of wanted to get your perspective on it as a priest.
Yeah, it's a disaster.
But first, like a little introductory.
Sure.
Since you've never been on the show before, when and why did you decide to become a priest?
So I've been a priest for 12 years and moved to Oklahoma about 20 years ago, and I was a high school teacher actually for a couple years, about 4 years. Coached the basketball, taught theology, and just loved it. And it was kind of my first experience of like really teaching the faith and really immersing myself in the faith. And it just made me want to do that every day of my life. And so 2002, I entered the seminary and was there for about 5 years, and then was ordained in 2007 for the Diocese of Tulsa in eastern Oklahoma.
It's awesome.
It's a great life. You should try it.
If you could, would you explain sort of what the bill that is passed is and what it means?
Yeah, so in California, they just passed a bill in the state Senate that is going to require priests to break the seal of confession, basically. That if somebody comes into the confessional and confesses certain crimes, certain sins, that a priest would be legally bound to report that. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably knowledgeable about the Catholic faith, or if you're not, priests just simply can't do that. We don't do that. Anything that's said in the confessional remains a secret forever. So even if the person says, "Hey, Father, you can tell anyone you want," we're not going to tell anybody. Even if the person dies, we still can't tell anybody. Even if the police come knocking on our door, we still can't say anything and won't say anything. So the law is trying to get people to report sexual misconduct, and which actually priests are already bound to do if it happens in a counseling situation. But in the confessional, it's not going anywhere.
Right, and if you were in the scenario, like if you were a priest in California, would you abide by this law?
No, and I think you're going to hear every priest in California say that they simply won't. The bishop, I forget what diocese it was, Bishop Barber, he already kind of wrote in and simply just said, "We will not comply. I will not comply." And that's the way it's going to be. And so California really is making a big mistake. They're setting themselves up, certainly for a court battle. I mean, this will go to court, and if it passes, and if it's signed by the governor and all that, which it sounds like it's going to be. And it'll go to court, and so the church will fight back. But if it's eventually, even if the court says, priest, you have to legally comply, we're just not going to. We're not going to.
And how do you feel like part of that affects our church, like as a whole in our country?
Yeah, so it's a threat to religious liberty. It's the state, and in this case, the state of California, trying to dictate to a religion, Catholicism, what we believe and how we practice. And that's not the role of government. Government is meant to protect the religious liberty of the people, to allow people the freedom to worship as they choose. And this is stepping way over that line and encroaching on our freedom of what it is that we believe about the sacrament of confession. And anyway, it's going to be a little messy, but it's also in our 2,000-year history, it's also not something we haven't dealt with before. So I think the best example is a saint named St. John Nepomuc. There's a parish over in Yukon, in the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, named after him. Well, St. John Nepomuc was killed because he refused to give up something that was told to him in the sacrament of confession. And there's other priests that's happened to. Priests have been thrown in jail over the years, but it's something in the United States that hasn't happened. So California is just stepping way over the line here and are setting themselves up for a disaster.
How do you feel like this affects people? Because from what I'm hearing, it sounds like people going to confession will be way more hesitant to, and they won't be cleansed from their sin, which is a very important aspect of Catholic life. So how do you feel like that affects not just the priesthood, but the clergy going to confession?
Yeah, no, I think anybody. One of the things when I go to confession, when you go to confession, right, you walk in there and you lay it all out. I mean, you say every single thing that's on your mind because you know it's not going anywhere.
Right.
So if you go into the confessional and you think, okay, I should say this but not this, or I can go to this priest but not that priest, it's what it's ultimately would do is it make people just stop going to confession.
Right.
And that's just not good for anybody. And quite frankly, it's not good for the state of California. People going to confession is good for them. It makes them better people. And so California, I would think, has an interest in, in having in trying to have good moral, upstanding people, and that's what confession ultimately helps us do. So it'd be a real shame if people started to shy away from the confessional because they thought the priest might tell someone what they did.
Absolutely. If you could emphasize, like, how strong would you say is the seal of confession? Like, what can and can you not reveal?
Yeah, the seal of confession is absolute. And so when somebody comes to confession, whatever they say in the confessional cannot be repeated to anyone at any time for any reason. That would even include, let's say the police come knocking at my door and they say, did this person come to you for confession? My answer would be no. Or I'm not answering that. Or they're not going to get that out of me, even if the person came. So that is under the seal. And so somebody who comes to confession should have no worries about saying anything. Sometimes we're kind of hesitant and we want to we say like some of our smaller sins, but we maybe have that one big one that we just it's hard to say out loud and we just don't want to say it. In the confessional, there is total freedom to share whatever is on your heart, to share whatever those sins are. I mean, even the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. Think of the worst thing ever. You can say that in confession, and the priest that you say it to will not repeat it to anyone at any time for any reason.
So it's a very, very strict seal.
Very much so, and that's drilled into us in the seminary, and I think it's important to remember that priests we go to confession too, and so we rely. I mean, I'm the giver of mercy through the power that Christ has given me, but I'm also a receiver of that mercy. I mean, so I go to confession, and when I go to confession, I expect.
Right.
That priest, whether I know them or not, whether I'm behind a screen or face to face, I've gone to confessions in airports and parking lots and wherever when there's a priest there and I can have the chance to go. And my expectation is that priest will not say anything to anyone for any reason, ever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so I can just say whatever I need to say.
That's so from California's viewpoint, especially the non-religious ones, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to stop crime.
Sure.
Which some might look at it as an absolutely good thing, and how can anybody else think otherwise? But obviously, they're going about it the wrong way. What do you think would be a better way for California to approach it?
Yeah, so I mean, already, this is true of priests all over the country, including California. We are already mandatory reporters. And so if somebody tells me in a counseling situation, if somebody walks up to me and says that they've committed the crime of sexual abuse of children, I'm already mandated to tell them. I'm already mandated to tell them. And so but we have this little exception, and that is in the confessional. It's an exception. And that exception just needs to stick around. And so I understand where people are coming from, I really do. And I understand that the church has messed up on several fronts for decades. And so maybe, I think people could argue it's something, we've kind of brought on ourselves. But California is just, they're going about it the wrong way. I think their intentions are right. It's just not going to have the effect that they think it is. It's going to make people, one, stop going to confession. It's going to pull people away from the church, which it would be bad for California. And then ultimately, it's going to probably land some priests in jail.
Absolutely.
And then California's going to have a whole another set of problems.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't only an attack on the Catholic Church, it's an attack on religious freedom in general. So do you feel like things like this could continue, not just for Catholicism, but for other religions?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, so if this passes, then what's next? You know, who's to say what California has to say about Islam or Judaism or other forms of Christianity? If they're going to be able to pass this and tell Catholics what we have to and don't have to do, then what's going to stop them from any other religion? And so that's where, and we've seen it, a lot of our Christian brothers and sisters from other denominations, and even Muslims and Jews, and who have stepped in to say, California, don't do this. And it's the same thing that we do with other religions. We believe different things, but we have this basic belief in the religious liberty of every person in this country.
Then how do you think we as lay people can contribute to this? Like, how do you think we can help to stand up for religious freedom, even if we're not in California?
Yeah, so I think, obviously getting involved in the political process. So if something like this were to happen, say where we live here in Oklahoma, that people would be contacting their elected representatives. In my mind, anyone who votes for this kind of bill, I'm never going to vote for, ever. And so standing up in that way, that this is what we believe as Catholics, and we're not going to vote for it, and we're not going to support anybody who supports measures that want to limit our religious freedom. We're not going to do it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, explaining your, from a priest perspective, because I could have done this episode just like a normal video, but I feel like it just adds so much weight to hear it from a priest and hear your perspective.
Yeah. When I would say, hear me loud and clear, everybody who's listening to this, as priests, whether in California or anywhere else, we will not comply with this law. My freedom is less important than you going to confession, quite frankly. And so that people should not worry about going to confession. They should just go. You go and go frequently, go often. It's one of the great joys I have as a priest is to hear confessions and free people from the bonds of sin and help them to live that life of freedom. And so what California is doing, I think, will ultimately be kind of a blip on the map. Mm-hmm. But even if it isn't, even if it's part of a larger movement across the country, we simply will not comply as priests. We will never tell what's told to us in confession. And if we do, then we're not priests anymore, and that's not something anybody's going to risk.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. And I also hear if you like what he's saying on here and you want to hear more often, I hear you have a podcast.
We do, yeah. So here we're in Stillwater, Oklahoma, Payne County. So me and the other priest here in town, Father Kerry Wakulich, he's at St. John's Catholic Student Center on the campus of Oklahoma State, and he and I do a little weekly podcast. It's called Pastors of Payne, Payne. We're in Payne County. Pretty funny, see? But anyway, that comes out, every week, and we're on the parish SoundCloud account, and then we're on iTunes and Google Podcasts and Spotify and all that good stuff.
So I will put that in the description below if you want to go check it out. So again, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.